There have been significant gun control concerns in America since the 1920s. After the restrictions on machine guns and sawed-off shotguns went into effect with the National Firearms Act of 1934, the urgent concerns died down a bit. More urgency swelled up during the 1960s, focusing in particular on handguns used in crimes. After the Gun Control Act of 1968, that urgency died down too, although it never went away. The reality is that the urgency of the gun control concerns of the 21st century can particularly be pinned down to having begun with the massacre of high school students in Columbine, Colorado in 1999, which left 15 dead and 24 wounded. Among the weapons used by the two young men in that attack were a semi-automatic pistol and rifle. One shooter used the rifle and had with him 13 10-round magazines. The other used the pistol and had with him one 52, one 32, and one 28-round magazine. Gun control issues in the past had almost totally been related to the actions of hardened or career criminals who used guns when committing such crimes as armed robberies and burglaries. But the Columbine incident was the first modern example in a long line of such massacres that have had nothing to do with the typical gun crime. They were committed usually by people with no previous record of using a gun in a crime, often by people who acquired their weapons legally. There were situations in which the gunmen were obviously just, for whatever reason, bent on killing or maiming as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. In fact, in most incidents, there were not even any specific individuals targeted for death. They have usually been just random acts of violence. Such random acts have occurred throughout U.S. history, but it took until the late 20th century before such acts became almost commonplace in the headlines. This is just a tiny list of some of the incidents since that Columbine massacre. You will likely think immediately of numerous others, such as the October 2018 Philadelphia synagogue shooting, and the most recent shooting that made the headlines on June 4, 2019, while this video was being created, at a municipal building in Virginia Beach, Virginia. This particular list, though, is of incidents that had one thing in common. All the perpetrators used either an AR-15 rifle or what is known as an AR-15 style rifle. But this is not to say that the AR-15 and other very similar weapons were not used in numerous other such events in recent years. They were. The full list is far too long to display here. I have been reading extensively for many months now about such random mass shootings and about the types of weapons that are commonly used by the perpetrators. I have several books and a huge collection of online articles in my computer's files about the topic now. The title of one from February 2018 is All American Killer: How the AR-15 Became Mass Shooters' Weapon of Choice. I think a question on the mind of many people who are concerned about gun control issues today is indeed, how did the AR-15 and weapons of a similar style become the weapon of choice in so many random acts of mass violence? The answer to that question clarifies many points relevant to the gun control, gun rights debate. So let's dive right into an exploration of the answer. The National Rifle Association itself has dubbed the AR-15 the most popular rifle in America. Americans own over 8 million of them. In fact, they suggest that the abbreviation AR could poignantly stand for America's Rifle. But that really isn't what the AR in AR-15 stands for. What does AR stand for? Where did the weapon come from? And what has made it so popular both with regular gun owners and psychopathic mass murderers? The AR stands for the first letters in the name of the Armalite Corporation, a small company focused on engineering weapons, where the AR-15 rifle originated in the 1950s. And in spite of what you may have heard from some gun rights commentators, it originated very specifically as what is termed an assault rifle. But to understand that term, we need to go back beyond the 1950s to the World War II era. The idea of the assault rifle was born in Germany in the early 1940s when the Nazis introduced a new type of weapon for soldiers called in German Sturmgewehr, rendered in English as storm rifle. The purpose of the weapon was to combine the lightweight and rapid fire of a machine gun with the power and accuracy of a rifle. The Storm rifle came equipped with a 30-round detachable magazine. The Soviets were very impressed with the German Storm rifles, and after the war ended began developing their own similar assault weapons. Designed by a man named Mikhail Kalashnikov, they are widely known as AK-47s. They were widely supplied or sold to the USSR's allies, and the blueprints were shared with friendly nations such as the People's Republic of China. The U.S. had also been impressed with the Storm rifle during the war, but was too busy after the war with other things, I guess, including building and testing atomic weapons, to develop their own assault weapon version right away. Which brings us to the Armalite Corporation. A subsidiary of an airplane manufacturer, Armalite got busy in the mid-1950s engineering lightweight guns to be made from aircraft-grade aluminum and modern plastics. The weapons used by American soldiers in both World War II and Korea were bulky wood and steel rifles. New materials could bring them into the modern world. In 1957, Armalite's top designer, Eugene Stoner, was tasked with developing for the U.S. Army a lightweight, high-velocity rifle, firing in semi- and full-automatic modes with firepower capable of penetrating a steel helmet or standard body armor at 500 yards. Some Army leaders were thrilled with the rifle Stoner created, dubbed the AR-15, but others were not impressed with a lightweight rifle that shot comparatively tiny little bullets. They were used to the bulky gun with very large bullets the Army had used for many decades, and they stalled a decision on what to do with Stoner's creation. Armalite, discouraged by the hesitants, decided the gun was probably not going to have a future in the U.S. military, so sold the rights to make it to the Colt Firearms Company for $75,000 and a royalty of 4.5% on future manufacture. Then came the Vietnam War. By 1961, the U.S. had sent some Army Special Forces trainers over there to train South Vietnamese troops. A faction in the Pentagon lobbied the Pentagon brass to acquire 1,000 of Stoner's rifles for use by the South Vietnamese troops and their American Special Forces trainers, and the rifles surpassed all expectations in combat. A report to the Pentagon noted that the AR-15 suited the violent short clashes at close ranges which are characteristic of guerrilla warfare in Vietnam, and added that this extremely mobile type of offensive warfare had placed a high premium on small, lightweight weapons. By the way, the AR-15 is now marketed to the general public as a macho gun, designed for big, burly, manly American guys. For instance, a notorious Bushmaster Gun Company ad in recent years touted their version of the rifle with the slogan, "Consider your man card reissued," because owning such a gun would prove what a powerful hunk you were. But that 1960s era report on how it had performed in Vietnam praised the weapon as, quote, well suited to the small stature of the Vietnamese, whose average soldier stands 5 feet tall and weighs 90 pounds. As you can clearly see in this 1961 photo showing an American advisor working with a group of Vietnamese soldiers. Although it may have been lightweight, what really impressed the Pentagon was the killing power of the AR-15. The battlefield testimonials included in that report are horrific. One describes an Army Ranger killing a Viet Cong soldier at about 15 meters with a 3-round burst. One round in the head took it completely off, it reads. Another in the right arm took it completely off too. One round hit him in the right side, causing a hole about 5 inches in diameter. Each shot was a killer. Any one of the 3 would have caused death, and thus was born a star. JFK admired the AR-15 before his death, as you can see in this photo in the Oval Office. And in December 1963, the Army adopted the AR-15, rebranding the one used in the Army eventually as the M16. Versions of the AR rifle have been in the U.S. military's infantry weapons of choice ever since. Some watching this video are old enough to remember this fellow, Barry Sadler. He had served from December 1964 to May 1965 as a Green Beret medic in Vietnam. A serious injury brought him back from the war, and by December 1965 he had recorded a song about his war experiences that he titled Ballad of the Green Berets. The war hadn't heated up much yet when the single was first played on the radio, and it was so catchy and patriotic that it made it to #1 on the U.S. music charts in January 1966. Barry went on to make a couple of albums of similar songs, but by the time they were out, the attitudes about the war had definitely soured in much of the country, and military songs were no longer as appealing. So his music career basically fizzled after that. But I don't bring him up in the middle of this narrative for the Green Beret song. I bring him up for another one of his ballads that I'd never heard before a few weeks ago when I stumbled on a recording of it on YouTube. You might say this one is more of a love song, directed at the love of his life while in the service. It's called Son of a Gun of a Gun.
Man's best friend is his mother, but not in Vietnam. Just let me tell you, brother, I'm alive and here's why I am. 'Cause I've got one son of a gun, You see this AR-15, she's hard and she's mean, and she ain't built for love or fun. And yet this AR-15 is a part of my team, 'cause she's one son of a gun, They may shoot away my green beret, clip my silver wings, even make me lose my pay, and lots of other things, but leave my AR-15 to me. She's a queen, she's the best gal I've ever won, 'cause she's what stands between me and the enemy VC. Yes, she's one son of a gun,
I find this song extremely significant because many in the gun rights groups will make a huge point that the AR-15 is not in the slightest some sort of equivalent of a military weapon. But old Barry calls his gun point blank an AR-15, and he loves her because she's mean and part of his military team. Some gun rights folks may try to get around this glitch by noting that the AR-15 sold to civilians may look like an Army gun. They may look scary, but that's just a cosmetic issue. No, they insist they are just plain old semi-automatic weapons, and in fact, modern sporting rifles. The gun used by guys like Barry in the Army was fully automatic, so that is what made it vicious and dangerous. If it's semi-automatic, it's practically benign. Except there's this, from the official Army Rifle Marksmanship Field Manual. The most important firing technique during modern fast-moving combat is rapid semi-automatic fire. It is surprising how devastatingly accurate rapid fire can be. At ranges beyond 25 meters, rapid semi-automatic fire is superior to automatic fire in all measures: shots per target, trigger pulls per hit, and even time to hit. Yes, the Army version has a gadget to click to make it able to fire continuously with one trigger pull, which is what makes it an automatic. But the reality is that most of the time, modern troops only use that setting for very limited specific situations. So, back to the history of the AR-15. It was available to the mass market of civilians in the early 1960s, but it wasn't popular at all until much later. In 2001, only 60,500 were produced. But then something happened to make sales take off, and in 2012, 1.27 million were produced. And there have been millions produced since then. One recent report noted that 1 in 5 of all guns bought in America these days is an AR-15 type. It would appear that the something that triggered the change was the expiration of the federal assault weapons ban in 2004. And one of the main results of that expiration was the rush by gun manufacturers to not just provide semi-automatic weapons, but to provide an improved type of weapon that allows for customization and modification of the weapons. They can be made to look even more militaristic, even more grand in the eyes of their owners. For, of course, owning a modern sporting rifle isn't just about being able to put a bullet in a paper target, any more than owning a sporty car is just about getting from one place to another. Men who are really into cars or guns want to look good, look macho, look grand while doing those things. To understand what customizable and modifiable means in terms of guns, you need to know a few things about them. See this? This is what you are really buying when you buy an AR-15 style semi-automatic weapon. It is the small part that holds the firing mechanism. It's the part that the government actually considers the gun, and it must carry a serial number from the manufacturer. It's called the receiver. It holds the trigger and also holds the removable magazine in which the bullets are lined up ready to shoot. Everything else on the gun, as you heft it in your hands to bring it up to shoot, besides the receiver, is an interchangeable part, including even the trigger. Yes, on AR-15 type rifles, each little and big part, including the trigger, is interchangeable with lots of other similar pieces. It's sort of like what my husband did for years when computers were simpler and the parts larger. You could buy one all put together and just plug it in and use it. But for less money, you could buy the main part of the computer, the motherboard, and then lots of other pieces to go with it, and a metal tower to put it in, and create a do-it-yourself computer. That's what AR-15s and similar weapons are like. You can buy one right off the rack starting at about $500 and head out to the target range today. Or you can buy the receiver and lots of parts, everything from the barrel that the bullets come out of to the stock that you hold up to your shoulder when you shoot, and lots more, and build it yourself. The parts come separately or in various combinations in kits. In fact, if a fellow wants to, he can make a do-it-yourself pink AR-15 for wife or girlfriend, or preteen daughter. Most of the parts can be purchased in a variety of colors, including pink. And if you want to go fancier later, you can buy more new parts and shuffle it all around and make a new improved model. It's very much like Legos or an old erector set. All of this is possible in part because the AR-15 patent has long since expired. It is now what is sometimes referred to as an open source platform. Manufacturers are all designing from the same basic specifications that were in the original patent, so nearly any AR-15 lower receiver can be fitted to any other AR manufacturer's gun parts, including barrels, magazines, handguards, and scopes. You could, for instance, take any AR lower receiver and using parts made by the Bushmaster Company, you could build it into a replica of the gun Adam Lanza used to kill 20 children in Newton, Connecticut. The one that allowed him to shoot 150 rounds in less than 5 minutes. That's one shot every other second. Take the same lower receiver again, and this time use components from the Smith & Wesson Company, and you could recreate the rifle James Holmes used to murder movie patrons in Aurora, Colorado. You might say it's all a bit like what Dr. Frankenstein did as he patched together interchangeable body parts. As one online blogger put it, I love the customization and freedom the AR-15 platform provides, and I love having one rifle that I can reconfigure to suit almost any need I may have. Let's see, we have a gun that was designed specifically just to kill as many humans as possible, as quickly as possible, and as efficiently as possible. What other need could it meet? Is he just talking about a need to shoot at a target, or a need to shoot at an animal, or to shoot one burglar? Are there scores of other needs I'm not thinking of that would require all sorts of cool reconfigurations? But I digress. Once you have either purchased a ready-to-shoot AR-15 or a clone, or put your do-it-yourself gun together, just what is it capable of? What did Mr. Stoner have in mind when he engineered it? For certainly he wasn't creating something with the goal of making little holes in a paper target at a shooting range. As one author has vividly written, the AR-15 assault rifle was engineered to create what one of its designers called maximum wound effect. It's a perfect killing machine, says Dr. Peter Ree, a leading trauma surgeon and retired captain with 24 years of active duty service in the Navy. One of the ER doctors who treated victims of the Parkland shooting in 2018 wrote an opinion piece about the experience online last year. Before we read some of her words, let me explain a slang term she uses. This is what is called a cigarette boat. They are very long, narrow power boats used for racing. First built in the 1960s, they were typically used to smuggle drugs and tobacco from the Caribbean across to the United States, which is where they earned their name cigarette boat. A cigarette boat can go up to 200 miles per hour in calm water, and even in rough water out on the open sea can go to 100. So what do cigarette boats have to do with AR-15 shootings? The doctor explains. Routine handgun injuries leave entry and exit wounds and linear tracks through the victim's body that are roughly the size of the bullet. If the bullet does not directly hit something crucial like the heart or the aorta, and they do not bleed to death before being transported to our care at a trauma center, chances are we can save the victim. The bullets fired by an AR-15 are different. They travel at higher velocity and are far more lethal. The damage they cause is a function of the energy they impart as they pass through the body. A typical AR-15 bullet leaves the barrel traveling almost 3 times faster than and imparting more than 3 times the energy of a typical 9mm bullet from a handgun. An AR-15 rifle is outfitted with a magazine cartridge with 50 rounds, allows many more lethal bullets to be delivered quickly without reloading. The bullet from an AR-15 passes through the body like a cigarette boat traveling at maximum speed through a tiny canal. The tissue next to the bullet is elastic, moving away from the bullet like waves of water displaced by the boat, and then returns and settles back. This process is called cavitation. It leaves the displaced tissue damaged or killed. The high-velocity bullet causes a swath of tissue damage that extends several inches from its path. It does not have to actually hit an artery to damage it and cause catastrophic bleeding. Exit wounds can be the size of an orange. Here's a rough approximation of that cavitation effect. The ER doctor continues, with an AR-15, the shooter does not have to be particularly accurate. If a victim takes a direct hit to the liver from an AR-15, the damage is far graver than that of a simple handgun shot injury. Handgun injuries to the liver are generally survivable, unless the bullet hits the main blood supply to the liver. An AR-15 bullet wound to the middle of the liver would cause so much bleeding that the patient would likely never make it to a trauma center to receive our care. Here's another way to look at the idea of the internal injuries caused by high-velocity bullets. The doctor continues. One of my ER colleagues was waiting nervously for his own children outside the school. While the shooting was still in progress, the first responders were gathering up victims whenever they could and carrying them outside the building. Even as a physician trained in trauma situations, though, there was nothing he could do at the scene to help save the victims who had been shot with an AR-15. Most of them died on the spot with no fighting chance at life. And here is the doctor's conclusion of the matter. As a doctor, I feel I have a duty to inform the public of what I have learned as I have observed these wounds and cared for these patients. It's clear to me that AR-15 or other high-velocity weapons, especially when outfitted with a high-capacity magazine, have no place in a civilian's gun cabinet. I have friends who own AR-15 rifles. They enjoy shooting them at target practice for sport and fervently defend their right to own them. But I cannot accept that their right to enjoy their hobby supersedes my right to send my own children to school, to a movie theater, or to a concert, and to know that they are safe. Can the answer really be to subject our school children to active shooter drills, to learn to hide under desks, turn off the lights, lock the door, and be silent, instead of addressing the root cause of the problem and passing legislation to take AR-15 style weapons out of the hands of civilians? Or as another ER doctor put it, people may insist that, quote, If we ban AR-15s, they'll just find other ways, unquote. His response is blunt. I'm an ER doctor. I've seen every way there is. Nothing comes close to empowering murderers with the ability to destroy as many human bodies as quickly and effortlessly. So let them find other effing ways. It's not that complex. Of course, none of this is ever mentioned on websites promoting the AR-15 style rifle as just a recreational tool, and the refrain that it isn't an assault weapon continues unabated in such circles. Here, for instance, is part of a public relations list on the website of the Gun Owners of America, a gun rights advocacy group. They want very desperately to drive home points like these. AR-15 platform rifles are among the most popular firearms being sold. They are today's modern sporting rifle. AR-15 style rifles are not assault weapons or assault rifles. An assault rifle is fully automatic, a machine gun. Automatic firearms have been severely restricted from civilian ownership since 1934. If someone calls an AR-15 style rifle an assault weapon, he or she either supports banning these firearms or does not understand their function in sporting use, or both. Please correct them. Assault weapon is a political term created by California anti-gun legislators to ban some semi-automatic rifles there in the 1980s. Oh, I see. A term created by flaming liberals in the 1980s, eh? There's just one problem with this bold assertion. Sorry, Mr. Gun Owner of America, these catalogs from the 1980s were not published by flaming liberals, and they pointedly and enthusiastically label all these semi-automatic weapons as assault rifles and assault weapons. It was their choice of identification. It's only in recent years that gun control opponents realized that the identification was causing them problems, and thus they needed to frantically somehow rebrand their favorite guns to make them sound more friendly, and thus have latched onto the term modern sporting rifle, a phrase they totally concocted, perhaps even with the help of a marketing firm that did some sort of research using focus groups to test out what term might sound suitably innocuous. It's as if your neighbor had a cage in his backyard holding a vicious grizzly bear. Since it's behind his high fence and you can't see it, you can only guess by the sound of the growling what it is. So he reassures you it's all in your head. What he actually has in his cage is a fozzie bear. See, all he needed to do was rebrand the grizzly and suddenly it's a marshmallow. Pay no attention to that growling. Fozzie's just hungry. I'll get him another banana. By the way, the NRA enthusiastically promotes childhood exposure to the so-called modern sporting rifle, and not just having dads around the house and learning not to touch it. The American Rifleman magazine recently featured an article about teaching a barely 5-year-old boy to shoot a Ruger-branded AR, as they put it, a 21st century gun for a 21st century kid, encouraging use of the 2-finger trigger pull method to help the child squeeze off a rifle round. The gun industry's trade group, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, or NSSF, is one of those groups that officially insists that the AR-15 style rifles are not assault weapons, adding that the gun looks like military rifles but functions just like other semi-automatic civilian sporting firearms. As one writer put it, the NSSF portrays the AR-15 as little more than a modern evolution of Grandpa's hunting rifle. Even traditional bolt-action rifles, the group notes, had once evolved from weapons used in World War I. Thus, it may not surprise you to learn that in May 2018, the NSSF expelled the Dick's Sporting Goods Company from membership in the foundation. Dick's is one of the largest sporting goods chains in the nation. Earlier that year, the CEO of Dick's, Edward Stack, announced that the company was no longer going to carry the so-called modern sporting rifles in their stores, planned to destroy all remaining stock they had of such guns, will no longer carry high-capacity ammunition magazines, was raising the minimum age to purchase a gun in their store to 21, and was even calling for more gun restrictions from the government. As one report last March put it, Stack made the decisions after he learned that a teen charged with the Parkland shooting had bought a shotgun at a Dick's store. It didn't matter to him that the gun wasn't used in the attack. You know, everybody talks about the thoughts and prayers going out to them. That's great. That doesn't really do anything, he said on CNN after the shooting. We felt we needed to take a stand and do this. I basically said, I don't care what the financial implication is. The NSSF announcement explained that Stack engaged in conduct detrimental to the interests of the foundation. In other words, Edward Stack was a traitor to the cause. Of course, Stack's stand hasn't diminished the appeal of these weapons to the gun-owning world. The average civilian assault rifle owner doesn't own just one. 90% own at least one actual AR-15 style one, and the majority have at least two more that are either clones or similar assault-style weapons. 27% of such owners have 4 or more, in addition to any pistols and regular hunting rifles each likely owns also. And I'm going to guess a significant majority of those fellows agree 100% with the sentiment on this bumper sticker. Back in the 1970s, you could see bumper stickers and decals like the ones on the left on a limited number of vehicles. Most usually, I'm guessing, on a truck in a filling station parking lot area when you were traveling south of the Mason-Dixon line. And maybe if the driver got out to mosey into the station to get a pack of chawing tobacco, he might be wearing a t-shirt like the one on the right, or a lapel pin like these on his jacket. If you peeked into the bed of his truck, you'd likely spot the gun rack mounted behind the driver's seat with a shotgun or rifle or 2 or 3 perched on it. Yes, the fellow with these wanted to make sure you knew the only way to get his gun was to peel or pry his cold, dead fingers from around it. You might guess now that the idea of putting this slogan on stickers and t-shirts was the invention of the National Rifle Association, but you'd be wrong. It was the brainchild instead of another gun rights advocacy group, the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms, based in Bellevue, Washington. The CCRKBA was originally a committee of a politically conservative group called the Young Americans for Freedom, but has been in independent operation since 1971. CCRKBA believes in the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution upholding the right of the people to keep and bear arms, that firearms registration does not and cannot solve the problem of rising crime in the country, that gun registration would inevitably lead to the eventual confiscation of firearms, that a mandatory sentence on conviction of a felony involving the use of a firearm is a deterrent to crime, that the disarming of individual law-abiding citizens will result in the loss of individual freedoms. The CCRKBA is still around, but indeed it has taken a position in the gun rights movement far behind the NRA since the early 1980s. Sometime, probably in the 1980s, the NRA tweaked the old saying a bit, changing cold dead fingers into cold dead hands. Since that time, the new version has dominated the pro-gun rights bumper sticker and t-shirt world and can be seen on many other items such as belt buckles, plaques, mugs, and more. The slogan got a particularly big boost from movie star Charlton Heston in the year 2000. Heston had been a longtime member of the NRA and in 1997 was named to the NRA Executive Board. In 1998, he was named the new president of the organization, a largely ceremonial position, but one providing him an opportunity to be an active spokesman for the group. A year later came the 1999 Columbine High School massacre, where 2 young men went on a rampage resulting in 15 dead and 24 injured. The shocking incident riveted the country's attention to the issue of gun controls and gun rights. Concerned that liberal congressmen would seize the opportunity to pressure for more gun control laws, the NRA doubled down on its gun rights advocacy. And a year later, the cold dead hands meme became even more wildly popular following a stirring speech by Heston at the 2000 NRA convention. In the speech, he had urged the crowd to be ready to do battle leading up to the fall presidential election to assure that George W. Bush prevailed over Al Gore. And at the end, he burned the familiar slogan indelibly into the minds of everyone there and everyone who saw the videotapes later. He built up to the grand finale of his speech with these words: "For the next 6 months, Al Gore is going to smear you as the enemy. He will slander you as gun-toting, knuckle-dragging, bloodthirsty maniacs who stand in the way of a safer America. Will you remain silent? I will not remain silent. If we are going to stop this, then it is vital to every law-abiding gun owner in America to register to vote and show up at the polls on Election Day. And then came his most memorable moment as a gun spokesman.
So, as we set out this year to defeat the divisive forces that would take freedom away, I want to say those fighting words for everyone within the sound of my voice to hear and to heed, and especially for you, Mr. Gore. From my cold, dead hands.
Yes, he lifted up a replica of a Revolutionary War era rifle and essentially declared political war on the Democrats. Heston repeated the cold dead hands phrase at the end of the NRA conventions in 2001 and 2002. Later in 2002, he announced via a videotape that he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. In his final appearance at an NRA convention in 2003, he was too feeble to give a speech, but they played a short farewell video he had previously recorded. At the end of the video, Wayne LaPierre presented him with a rare Civil War-era Winchester rifle, and Heston did have enough energy to hold it up in the air and say, "From my cold dead hands," one last time. From that point on, bumper stickers and t-shirts and other items with the slogan on them sometimes featured Heston's silhouette raising aloft a flintlock rifle as he did at the fiery 2000 convention. As a footnote, in 2004, the NRA magazine offered that 1866 Winchester rifle, valued at $25,000, as a prize in an NRA magazine contest. Heston wouldn't be needing it. By 2005, he was almost totally bedridden, and he died in 2008. The cold dead hands slogan has never gone out of style, but in recent years the NRA and other pro-gun rights groups have started featuring another slogan. Unless you are an expert in ancient Greek writing, you probably don't know what this says, but lots of Americans do know and have it emblazoned on hats and t-shirts and more these days. Transliterated to English, it looks like this. And in American English, it is usually pronounced Mullen Lobby. So what on earth has a whole subculture of American gun rights advocates, many of them no doubt Southern good old boys, speaking ancient Greek? This.
Spartans! Lay down your weapons! Persians! Come and get them!
That scene from the movie 300 is a representation of a confrontation between the armies of the Persian king Xerxes and the Spartan king Leonidas in the year 480 BC at the Battle of Thermopylae. The Spartan army, with 300 soldiers, along with 6,000 or so Greek allies from other areas, was vastly outnumbered by the Persian army. Some ancient sources put the number of Persians at 2 million, although modern historians say it was likely more like 100,000 or 200,000, which of course is still pretty stiff odds. Xerxes had demanded that the 300 Spartans lay down their arms and surrender. The Spartans supposedly defiantly shouted Mullen Lobby, which basically translate to "come and take them." You can take it from there to figure out what the taunt signifies to those in pro-gun rights circles. The slogan is also evidently a popular illustration for tattoos, such as this one, freshly added to the arm of conservative political commentator and former Florida Congressman Allen West. More disturbing is the use of the slogan on children's, toddlers, and even infants' clothing. Are they really indoctrinating their kids from birth to have a permanent perspective that the government is likely, sometime soon, to try to confiscate the family's guns, and that their calling in life is to be eternally ready to resist with violence? Starting kids so young down such dark paths can't help but remind me of these pictures. Perhaps you wonder just how on earth these people think that they could succeed in a resistance movement aimed at stopping some future dystopian tyranny imposed by the most powerful government on earth just with their personal rifles, no matter how powerful those rifles. Here's how that question was answered in 2013 on an internet forum frequented by gun rights people. One commenter had noted, "The current gun control push is not about assault weapons. It's about disarming the masses to better control us, so we'll be unable to resist the tyrannical forces our founding fathers warned us against, which is why they included the Second Amendment in their Constitution." A visitor to the forum who wasn't part of their subculture noted, "This argument is obsolete and ridiculous. You don't resist tyrannical forces with AR-15s because tyrannical forces have tanks, helicopters, bombers, and so on that are immune to AR-15 tiny bullets." He was shot down almost immediately by everyone else on the forum, starting with this fellow's retort. "Of course you resist. What are you going to do, submit? And I think your argument that the people couldn't win is a little short-sighted. The Taliban is doing pretty well with homemade bombs and 50-year-old AK-47s, and they have to contend with drone strikes. It would have to get pretty bad before the government started dropping bombs on us. Also, at least half the military would not follow orders to fight fellow Americans. There are approximately 100 million gun owners in America. If only 20% joined the fight, that's still 20 million to the approximately 2 million military that might be left after those that chose not to fight their own countrymen left their post and joined the militia's side." And no, this answer is not one just offered by a handful of gun nuts on the edges of the anti-gun control movement. It is front and center with a large swath of that movement. The main goal of the NRA is to eliminate any federal, state, or local gun control laws in America already and prevent any more from being put in place. Their central belief has long been that any restriction or regulation of any kind is the first step on a slippery slope to gun confiscation. This includes even simple things that might seem reasonable to most citizens, such as higher age limits on gun purchases or possession, or even just a 1 or 2 day waiting period to buy a gun. As mentioned in part 2 of this video series, in order for this to happen, they need to follow 4 steps. Number 1, change public opinion to align with their convictions. Number 2, convince federal and state congressmen to vote on gun control measures in line with their goals. Number 3, assure the election of presidents who are sympathetic to their goals so that, number 4, judges will be appointed who are sympathetic to their goals, who are then able to declare unconstitutional any laws that are passed that do not align with the goals. They have already been amazingly successful in their work on step 1. For instance, as mentioned earlier, the public went from being 60% in favor of a handgun ban in 1959 to 41% in 1975 to only 24% in 2012. And although Supreme Court rulings for 200 years had insisted the Second Amendment did not address private gun ownership rights for personal use, by early 2008, 73% of Americans believed that the amendment actually did guarantee that right. A significant proportion of the reason for these public opinion statistics can be attributed to the public relations blitz, particularly just through the use of simple tools such as bumper stickers and billboards by gun rights groups, the NRA in particular. They have been recently successful in step 3, with the election of Donald Trump, who is wildly enthusiastic about having their backing. During his campaign in 2016, he released a policy paper stressing that, quote, concealed carry is a right, not a privilege, and contending for a federal law that a concealed carry permit from one state should be recognized by all other states, just as driver's licenses from one state allow driving in all states. And that has led to success in step 4, as Trump has been gleefully appointing Supreme Court and federal judges across the nation who are sympathetic to the NRA positions. But public opinion and even judges are not the ultimate source of legal change in the country. The laws are not made by the courts nor by public opinion polls. They are made by legislatures at the state and federal level, and thus the NRA actually expends its most vigorous methods on attempts to influence congressmen and women, and their most fruitful efforts in this quest has been at the state level, where results can come much more quickly. You may be tempted to assume that their sway over congressmen indicates that the NRA bought their support by donating piles of cash to their election efforts. It's a logical assumption, but an incorrect one. Here's how the New York Times explained it in an article shortly after the Parkland School massacre in Florida in February 2018. To many of its opponents, that decades-long string of victories is proof that the NRA has bought its political support. But the numbers tell a more complicated story. The organization's Political Action Committee over the last decade has not made a single direct contribution to any current member of the Florida House or Senate, according to campaign finance records. In Florida and other states across the country, as well as on Capitol Hill, the NRA derives its political influence instead from a muscular electioneering machine, fueled by tens of millions of dollars worth of campaign ads and voter guide mailings that scrutinize candidates for their views on guns and propels members to the polls. It's really not the contributions, said Cleta Mitchell, a former NRA board member. It's the ability of the NRA to tell its members, here's who's good on the Second Amendment. In other words, the congressmen do not get a positive incentive of an influx of donation money from the NRA. They get a negative incentive from the threat of the NRA withholding votes by its members. Just like your grade school teacher, the NRA assigns letter grades to political candidates based on their record of voting for gun rights and against any gun controls. These grades are not really sent to the candidates themselves. They are announced to the public in NRA publications. As the Time article explained, the NRA's impact comes in large part from the simplicity of the incentives it presents to political candidates, letter grades based on their record on the Second Amendment, that guide the NRA's involvement in elections. Lawmakers who earn an A rating can count on the group not to oppose them when they run for re-election or higher office. For candidates who earn lower grades, the group deploys a range of blunt force methods against them. The NRA mails the voter guides to its 5 million members, displaying images of favored candidates on the front, and some state chapters bombard supporters with emails about coming elections. In addition, each election season, an issue of the American Rifleman comes out that uses the subscriber's mailing address to determine just who they should vote for in the U.S. Senate and House races and in any governor's race. This information is printed right on the cover of the magazine as their very own voting guide. The organization's calculation is that its money is better spent on maintaining a motivated base of gun rights supporters than on bankrolling candidates directly. When candidates waver in their support for sweeping gun rights, the group does not hesitate to turn on them. After Ted Strickland, a Democrat who earned the NRA's endorsement as a candidate for governor of Ohio, backed a ban on assault weapons, the organization spent more than $1.5 million in so-called independent expenditures, like TV ads, to defeat him in a 2016 bid for the Senate. It also picks a side in presidential elections, of course, and expends lots of cash on promoting its choice. But again, it does it through its own ads, like in 2016. The NRA spent $20 million in that year's election cycle on ads and other campaign tactics intended to persuade voters to reject Hillary Clinton, and an additional $11 million to support Donald J. Trump, money that is not marked down as a direct contribution to Mr. Trump because the NRA spent the cash on its own. The success of the NRA's methods is more obvious in Florida than anywhere else in the nation. The reason for that may surprise you. The answer is that Florida has Marion Hammer. Perhaps you thought the face of the NRA was its longtime top leader, Wayne LaPierre. No, Wayne is just the public face of the NRA, its main public spokesperson. The private face of the NRA, the one person who, for almost 4 decades now, has been personally responsible for the successes of the organization, for moving its agenda forward, has been Marion Hammer. The Stand Your Ground gun law that started in Florida and is being cloned around the nation now, that was Marion's doing. An extremely lax concealed carry law that started in Florida and has already been cloned in almost all states across the land, that was Marion's work too, as have been 30 more gun laws that have been shoved through the Florida state legislature, all shepherded by Maid Marion, who, among many other things, is the NRA's top lobbyist in Florida. Shortly after the Parkland massacre, New Yorker magazine writer Mike Spies was doing an article on the events. At one point, he was with Florida House Democrat Jared Moskowitz, mingling with a group of public officials gathered outside the school as students gathered to place flowers on an improvised memorial and confront the officials with their demands. Moskowitz shook hands with Dan Daly, a young city commissioner in Coral Springs. "I was talking to one of the Douglas students," Daly said. "His only words to me were, 'Do something.' I had to tell him that I legally can't do anything because the governor could take away my job if I tried." Moskowitz turned to me. "That's the legacy of Marion Hammer," he said. What on earth did Daly mean that he could lose his job if he tried to do anything? Daly was referring to a law that Hammer worked to enact in 2011 during Governor Rick Scott's first year in office. The statute punishes local officials who attempt to establish gun regulations stricter than those imposed at the state level. Officials can be fined thousands of dollars and removed from office. So just who is this lady powerful enough to stop anyone in the Florida legislature from doing anything about school massacres? You might say she has quite a Cinderella story. If Cinderella wore a camo gown and combat boots instead of a shimmery gown and glass slippers, and was courted by Wayne LaPierre instead of a handsome prince. Born in 1939, Hammer was sent by her mother to live with her grandparents on a farm in South Carolina after her dad died in World War II. When she was 6 years old, her grandfather decided she was old enough to shoot a gun. He set up a tomato can on a fence post about 25 feet away and then handed her a .22 caliber rifle. Hammer has said that she hit the can on her first try. Fast forward through a short stint at college, a marriage, 3 kids, and lots of moving around. Back to the guns. Hammer became a life member of the NRA at age 29 in 1968, and the family settled in Tallahassee in the mid-70s. In 1974, she joined a local NRA volunteer in his successful fight against a Florida bill introduced that would ban black powder. That successful effort occurred just before the 1975 launch of the NRA's Institute for Legislative Action. It turned out that Hammer was a natural lobbyist and crusader. By 1978, the petite little Hammer, less than 5 feet tall, had become the executive director of the Unified Sportsmen of Florida and the NRA's top lobbyist in the state. Continuing her work in Florida, she had success after success, and by 1982 she was a member of the board of directors of the NRA. In 1987, she pushed through her pioneering Florida concealed carry law. In the early 1990s, she became NRA vice president, and between 1995 and 1998, she served as the NRA president, just before the presidential term of Charlton Heston. The New York article noted that, according to a former colleague at the ILA, Hammer, who is still on the NRA's board, has a direct line to Wayne LaPierre. Marion could do anything she wanted, and whatever she wanted she got, the former colleague told me. She would more or less single-handedly make legislation and push it. In 2016, the NRA paid Hammer $206,000 on top of the $110,000 she earned from the Unified Sportsmen of Florida. And the bottom line of the tactic that Marion Hammer has used for 40 years to turn the majority of the legislature in Florida to her bidding is her ability to mobilize, overnight, the rank and file of the NRA and USF to flood a senator's or congressman's office with phone calls, to rally them to get out and vote on any candidate or issue that has anything to do with the goals of the NRA. The 3 videos in this series have explored the battle lines that have ultimately been drawn in America in the 21st century over the tension between gun rights and gun control. And now we are left with a final matter. Is there any common ground to be found in the situation, any areas where compromise might be sought to address the crises of the growing number of incidents of mass gun violence? Or are we doomed to look forward to a grim, dystopian future, something akin to a weird, real-world version of the movie Westworld? Let's consider the 5 main different perspectives on gun rights and gun controls that are out there. The first is the rabid anti-gun perspective. Those who believe that no civilian should have a gun of any kind for any purpose, including for hunting. They are a very small minority and wouldn't compromise with anyone. The second perspective is the dogmatic, non-negotiable gun rights. The NRA and the others with this perspective have made it painfully obvious that they have absolutely zero interest in compromise of any kind. Their mantra is, "What part of shall not infringe do you not understand?" They are a very powerful, very vocal group, but they by no means have the allegiance of a majority of the population. The third perspective is that of the middle-of-the-road gun control. These folks have no interest in banning all weapons. They might advocate weapon registration so that guns used in crimes could be more easily tracked. These days, they're also primarily concerned with finding some way to curb the increase in mass killings before the situation gets totally out of hand. This usually means wanting to either ban semi-automatic weapons like the AR-15 or put strict controls on them. The fourth perspective is of the uninvolved. This includes those who have no particular interest at all in the issues around the Second Amendment, as it doesn't affect them directly. They pay little attention to the machinations of the gun rights groups. They don't get excited about any public relation messages put out by the gun control groups. They may even have concerns about the increase in school massacres and such, but unless one occurred in their own city, their concern dies down quickly after each news report cycle moves away from the latest killings. And the fifth perspective is of the totally oblivious. This includes those who are so focused on their own daily lives that they have little or no interest in any political or social issues. They don't pay attention to news or commentary on gun issues, and they may not even watch or read enough news to be made aware of all of the school and other mass shootings. Let's suppose, for instance, that you are part of group number 3. You have no illusions that we can or should ban all guns. You may even own a target pistol or a hunting rifle or 2 yourself, but you are deeply concerned about the proliferation of semi-automatic rifles, deeply concerned about the trauma of school shootings and school active shooter drills, and thus you still believe there are needs for some regulations and restrictions on weapons use in America. Is there any common ground that you could build on with other groups to somehow move forward? As I said in the beginning of this series, my purpose is not to provide specific solutions to the problems we've explored. It has been to equip viewers with some basic information and understanding of the issues. so that they can dig deeper into the topic if they choose, and so they can be at least minimally knowledgeable enough to dialogue productively with others about the topic. But I do have 4 principles to consider and a few words of encouragement in what seems at times like the gathering darkness. First, never underestimate the power of simple. The NRA and similar groups were able to change public opinion and perception on a number of issues in a very short number of years simply by being vocal and organized and passionate about their topic and promoting it with simple public relations methods such as bumper stickers. Are there ways to apply this principle to gun control? Second, people really can wake up. Some, hopefully many, of those peoples in groups 4 and 5 are capable of suddenly coming to a realization that the topic is important and they should give it their attention. If they do, then they are the ones you can find common ground with to build on. It may be a simple matter of finding what is called the teachable moment with such a person. They may have no interest in you giving them an uninvited lecture about the seriousness of gun issues. But if they should happen in passing to bring up some aspect of the topic based on something they read or saw on TV perhaps, you might find the doors open to add a little to what they saw. The more you know about the topic yourself, the more interesting you can make the information, the more easily you can find ways to weave it into the conversation. Third, the future belongs to the youth of now. Gun rights advocates avidly encourage and mentor any teens and young adults they find who have leadership potential for the movement. Right now, there is a movement across the U.S. among teens and young adults who are passionate about doing something about gun violence. If you have any way to support them with words of encouragement, by showing up at their rallies, or by donating to their causes, be sure to make that a priority. Fourth, the NRA is not the majority. They are influential only because they have long been loud and persistent and organized, and fiercely dedicated to what they believe to be a great cause. Those who are fiercely dedicated to a different point of view may be able to influence enough others to become an actual majority, but not unless they become equally persistent and loud and get organized. And now I'd like to offer a final word of encouragement. There may be the beginning of a cultural shift that could change things that legislatures can't. Just in case you didn't know, in 2015, Walmart quit selling semi-automatics. By 2018, they raised the age to buy any guns or ammunition to 21. In February 2018, Dick's Sporting Goods stopped sale of semi-automatic guns and high-capacity magazines and set a 21 age limit to purchase any guns. In September 2018, Levi Strauss, the jeans company, partnered with the anti-gun activist group Everytown for Gun Safety to lobby for common-sense gun control measures and committed to donating over $1 million over the next 4 years to various anti-gun activist groups. And most recently, May 2019, business software giant Salesforce barred its retail business customers from using its technology to sell semi-automatic weapons and some other firearms and accessories such as high-capacity magazines. You probably never heard of Salesforce, but it is a powerhouse in the business world. It has 40,000 employees, is worth $120 billion, and its headquarters is the tallest skyscraper in San Francisco. Salesforce's CEO, Mark Benioff, whose personal worth is over $6 billion, and who recently paid $190 million in cash to buy Time magazine, is very outspoken about many social and political positions and puts his money where his mouth is, including $1 million last year to the March for Our Lives gun control group spearheaded by some survivors of the Parkland massacre. The Salesforce decision put many companies in a panic because many give its software credit for their high profits. That includes such big outdoor franchises as Camping World that has spent more than $1 million a year on that software. Changing software now would be a huge headache for them. The Koch brothers are not the only billionaires who can invest in societal change. In closing, I'll share one last Facebook photo and message from a mom. My daughter came home from school one day crying that she needed new shoes. I thought that maybe someone had made fun of her over her shoes, but no. She informed me that she realized during an active shooter drill that if she was hiding from the shooter, the lights on her Skechers would give away her location. My baby is 8 years old and worrying about being shot because of her light-up shoes.